Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one rewriting all the rules. What if the sister everyone overlooked turned out to be the most powerful woman in the city, without anyone even knowing her name? What if the wedding meant to crown a golden child became the stage for a brutal reckoning years in the making? This isn't just a story about rivalry, it's about silence, legacy, and what happens when the person you thought you knew walks into the room holding the power to destroy or forgive. You might think you've heard stories about family betrayal before, but not like this, because here revenge doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a calm voice and a single tap of a phone. Stay with us. What unfolds next will leave you questioning everything about loyalty, identity, and what it really means to win. Let's begin. Reagan Whitmore learned early on that in her family, brilliance wasn't optional, it was expected. And not the quiet kind of brilliance that hides in the margins. No, the Whitmores admired the visible, the celebrated, the loud. The kind of brilliance her sister Madison wore like a tailored suit, polished, radiant, impossible to ignore. Madison was the prodigy, the Harvard-bound powerhouse, the girl who won state debate titles and gave graduation speeches quoted in local newspapers. Reagan, 3 years younger, preferred shadows. While Madison basked in applause, Reagan observed. She studied patterns, human ones, legal ones. She watched her sister climb, wondering if there was ever space in their family for someone who built quietly. There wasn't. "Why can't you be more like Madison?" their mother would ask, not cruelly, but with that thinly veiled disappointment that settled in the air like dust. At birthday dinners, Madison's achievements were paraded out like trophies, while Reagan's silence was mistaken for lack of direction. But silence wasn't absence. It was strategy. By 17, Reagan had already created a network. She used pseudonyms, burner emails, encryption tools Madison had never even heard of. While her sister was preparing for Ivy League law, Reagan was consulting for actual law firms, covertly offering insights on corporate restructuring and merger arbitration, all while sitting in her childhood bedroom. By high school graduation, she had money in offshore accounts and leverage in places no one expected. Not even her parents knew. Taking a gap year? Her father had frowned. To do what? Find yourself? "I guess," Reagan had replied with a shrug. What she didn't say, she had already found herself. She was simply protecting the rest of the world from knowing too soon. 4 years later, Madison was clerking for a Supreme Court judge, and Reagan, on paper, was running a boutique consulting agency out of a WeWork in downtown Boston. In reality, she held controlling interests in 6 major firms under shell companies, quietly orchestrating shifts in power, revenue, and reputation. But even empires built in silence eventually intersect with noise. It began the day Madison accepted a position at Langston and Burke, one of the oldest and most respected firms in Boston. She was giddy with self-congratulation when she called Reagan. "Corner office, real window, partner track in 5 years. What about you? Still dabbling?" "Something like that," Reagan had replied, sipping her espresso in a penthouse suite that overlooked Madison's new office. She wasn't angry, not anymore. There had been a time when the comparisons hurt, when being overlooked had felt like a wound. But now, it was leverage. And Reagan understood one universal truth about power. It doesn't need to be seen to be real. The tension came not from rivalry, but from something deeper, an emotional ache that lived in the space between love and resentment. Reagan had spent her life wanting Madison to see her, truly see her, not as the weird, awkward sister who preferred spreadsheets to socializing, but as an equal, maybe even as someone to be admired. That never happened. Madison's dismissal of her wasn't violent. It was worse. It was patronizing. "You're not a failure," she'd once said with a sympathetic smile. "You're just unconventional." So when Reagan met Connor Blake at a charity gala, she didn't mention Madison. And when Connor, an elite attorney and heir to the Blake estate, fell in love with her, Reagan kept her surname out of the headlines, just like always. Even when they got engaged, she let the world believe she was just a niche businesswoman marrying up. Madison, predictably, couldn't help herself. "He's looking for someone Established, she said one Thanksgiving, swirling wine and staring pointedly. Just don't embarrass him. Reagan didn't respond. But later that night, she finalized the paperwork that would complete the acquisition of Hawthorne Blackwell, the East Coast's most influential legal conglomerate. With that one move, every firm Madison had idolized was now under Reagan's domain. All of it, including Langston and Burke. She didn't tell anyone, not even Connor, not until the wedding. It was held at Cathedral on Beacon Hill, a grand, historic venue drenched in light and stained glass, with Boston's elite filling the pews. Judges, senators, CEOs, all unaware that the bride they were smiling at owned the very institutions they upheld. As Reagan walked down the aisle, the train of her gown trailing behind her like smoke, she saw Madison standing beside the altar in a sapphire maid of honor dress, lips curled in quiet condescension. Then the minister spoke. If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. And then Madison stepped forward. I do, she said. Her voice was calm, calculated. A whisper made loud through the cathedral's acoustics. Gasps followed. Reagan's heart didn't race. She had prepared for this. I have something to say, Madison continued, reaching into her bouquet and pulling out a folder. This woman, my sister, has been lying. About who she is. About what she does. She's been manipulating firms, infiltrating deals. She's not who she says she is. Connor froze. Guests murmured. Madison opened the folder. I have proof. But before she could continue, Reagan raised one hand. You're absolutely right, she said. A pause. Madison blinked. I'm not a consultant, Reagan continued, her voice unwavering. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Strategic Holdings, and as of this morning, we've completed our merger with Hawthorne Blackwell. Phones buzzed, heads turned. Emails arrived in real time. Legal filings, press releases, official confirmations. Reagan stepped closer to Madison and lowered her voice. And yes, Langston and Burke is part of that merger, meaning I own the firm, meaning I'm your boss. Madison stared at her. The color drained from her face. She dropped the folder. Pages fluttered across the marble floor like fallen feathers. Connor reached for Reagan's hand, pride written across his face. The congregation looked to the minister. He hesitated. Reagan nodded. Let's continue, she said softly. This is still a wedding. But Madison's voice cut through again, low and venomous. This isn't over. Reagan met her eyes. Actually, she said, pulling out her phone, check your email. A single chime echoed from Madison's purse. She opened her phone. Her breath caught. Termination notice. Effective immediately. Misconduct cited. You can't do this. I didn't, Reagan said. Your actions did. I just signed the paperwork. What would you do if your moment of triumph turned into your greatest humiliation? Can silence be more powerful than any spotlight? Madison thought the wedding would be her sister's undoing. She had no idea it was just the prologue to her own downfall. The reception hadn't even started yet. The reception at the Hawthorne Grand was meant to be a celebration, a glittering ballroom filled with chandeliers, clinking glasses, and whispered congratulations. But beneath the surface, something else simmered. Whispers no longer praised Reagan Whitmore as just the beautiful bride. They now carried weight, curiosity, fear. She was no longer the invisible sister. She was the woman who had dismantled a myth in front of Boston's elite. Madison was nowhere to be seen. Reagan stood by the towering window overlooking the harbor, watching the city blink beneath her. Connor was with the guests, helping smooth over the emotional whiplash that had derailed their vows. But Reagan needed air, space to think. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place came the weight. Not guilt exactly, but a strange ache she couldn't name. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. Beautiful view, came a voice behind her. Reagan turned. Her mother stood there, a champagne flute in hand, but untouched. You always loved the ocean, her mother said, even as a girl. Reagan didn't reply. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just heavy. You planned this, didn't you? Her mother asked. Every last detail. Reagan nodded slowly. I had to. Her mother sighed. Madison was wrong to do what she did, but this was something else. It wasn't revenge, Reagan said quietly. It was truth. Her mother looked down, And yet somehow it still felt like punishment. That word stung more than Reagan expected. She had spent years being invisible, being quiet. And now, finally, when she had proven her worth, it was called punishment, as if speaking truth after a lifetime of being silenced was an act of cruelty. I didn't want it to be like this, Reagan murmured. But you let it, her mother said. You let her walk into the trap. A beat. Then Reagan looked her mother in the eyes. Would you have believed me if I told you the truth before today? Silence. Her mother didn't answer. That was answer enough. Reagan excused herself and stepped out onto the terrace, cold night air biting at her arms. She clutched the railing, the noise from inside muted by thick glass. She'd won. She had everything she worked for, but it felt like standing atop a mountain alone. Then she saw the text. Unknown number. We need to talk. You missed something. Her heart stalled. Madison. She stared at the message for a long time, debating. Was it another ploy? Another twist in her sister's endless competition? But the phrasing was strange. Not a threat. Not venom. It almost sounded afraid. She replied with an address. Her private office in the city. Midnight. Reagan arrived early as always. The building was empty, the city humming low outside. She didn't know what to expect. She'd seen Madison furious, humiliated, desperate. But this felt different. At 12:01, the elevator dinged. Madison stepped out, not in heels or designer silk, but in jeans and a trench coat. No makeup, no performance. She sat down without a word. You said I missed something, Reagan began. Madison pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. Reagan didn't touch it. What's on it? Proof, Madison said, her voice low, that someone inside Whitmore Holdings is selling information to our competitors, someone close to you. Reagan narrowed her eyes. You're lying. Madison shook her head. I wish I was. Reagan hesitated, then inserted the drive into her laptop. It was all there. Recordings, account activity, internal memos. Names redacted, but dates and actions matched her inner circle. Someone had been feeding information to rival firms. For months, she felt a slow burn rise in her chest. Not anger, not fear. Betrayal. You wanted to destroy me, Reagan whispered. Now you expect me to believe you're trying to help? Madison didn't flinch. I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was trying to win. That's what we were taught, wasn't it? That only one of us could be the star. Reagan's voice cracked. So you tried to ruin my wedding? No, Madison said. I tried to reclaim my place. They sat in silence, the words hanging between them like fog. I was always afraid of you, Madison admitted finally. Not because you were smarter, but because you were quieter, harder to read. I could never control you, and that terrified me. Reagan let the words settle. You've always looked down on me, she said. No, Madison said. I looked through you, and that was worse. Reagan turned to the screen. The data was undeniable. Someone she trusted had turned on her, and Madison, her lifelong rival, was the one who brought it to light. Why are you doing this? Reagan asked. Why now? Because if you fall now, Madison said, I won't have beaten you. They will. Reagan stared at her. A long moment passed. You're not staying in Boston, she said. Madison nodded. No, I burned every bridge tonight. And yet you brought me this. Madison stood up. I don't expect forgiveness, Reagan, but I figured if I was going to start over, I should stop tearing down the only person who ever truly beat me. Reagan exhaled, the tension in her chest loosening just enough to let in something else. Not reconciliation, but recognition. As Madison left, Reagan sat alone, the screen glowing in the dark. The empire she built had enemies, and they were closer than she ever imagined. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to discover the betrayal came from within? Just as Reagan thought her war was over, she realized the real enemy was never in front of her. It was already inside her walls. Don't miss what happens when bloodlines, business, and betrayal collide in the next part of the story. Reagan stood alone in the boardroom of Whitmore Strategic Holdings, the city lights of Boston flickering behind her like a constellation of watchful eyes. The data from Madison's flash drive still glowed on the screen in front of her, cold and clinical. Transactions, access logs, decrypted conversations. It was undeniable. Someone from inside had betrayed her. For years, she had built this empire brick by brick, in silence, in shadows, with precision that bordered on obsession, not for applause, not even for revenge, but because building gave her control, and control meant safety, or so she thought. Now that foundation trembled. Connor entered quietly, not speaking at first. He had learned to recognize the storm in her silence. "You haven't slept," he said gently. Reagan didn't turn. "I didn't build this company to be brought down by someone I trusted." He approached slowly. "You built it for more than that, for yourself, for something that couldn't be taken." She finally turned toward him. "But it can be taken. Someone's trying to." Connor nodded. "Then we find out who, and we end it." She looked at him, the man who had stood beside her at the altar, in the courtroom, in the silence after family dinners that had once left her hollow. He wasn't just her husband. He was her anchor, her mirror, the one who had never asked her to shine louder, only truer. Reagan pressed a key, pulling up a final file. There were 3 names. One of them was her own chief of operations, Catherine. Her throat tightened. Catherine had been there since the beginning. A mentor turned friend. Someone who had guided her through her first merger, helped her hide from the spotlight, taught her how to speak power without raising her voice. The betrayal felt surgical, clean, precise. "You need to confront her," Connor said. Reagan nodded, her fingers trembling only slightly as she drafted the message. Catherine arrived the next morning, calm as ever, impeccably dressed, hair swept into the same tight bun she always wore on deal days. She walked in like she still belonged there. Reagan sat behind the glass desk, the city sprawling out behind her like territory won in battle. "I was expecting this," Catherine said, closing the door. "Then you know why we're here," Reagan replied, voice steady. Catherine sighed and sat. "You always saw too much. That's why I followed you in the first place." "You didn't follow me," Reagan said. "You helped build this with me." Catherine tilted her head. "At first, yes, but power, Reagan, has gravity, and you forgot that." Reagan blinked. "Forgot what?" "That once people orbit long enough, they either crash into the center or get flung out." There was no rage in Catherine's voice, only resignation. "You sold my strategies. You leaked internal intel to Blake and Rowe. They offered me equity," Catherine said. "Real equity. A board seat, after all I gave to you." Reagan stood slowly, walking to the window. "You didn't give. You built alongside me, and when it wasn't your name on the tower, you felt robbed." "I was robbed," Catherine said sharply. "You kept all the power behind a curtain. You played the ghost, the genius in the shadows. But some of us didn't want to live behind your illusion forever." Reagan turned. "So you chose to burn it down." "I chose to matter," Catherine said. "You left no room for anyone else to win." The words hit Reagan harder than she expected, because somewhere deep down she knew they were not entirely false. She had built the empire like a fortress, impenetrable, perfect, isolating. "Then leave," Reagan said quietly. "You'll get nothing more from this place." Catherine's face flickered just for a second with regret, but she stood, composed. "I already have." The door clicked shut behind her. The room felt colder. Weeks passed. News leaked. Quietly at first. Rumors about instability inside Whitmore Holdings. Investors got nervous. Partners hesitated. The board called for transparency. And for the first time in her life, Reagan considered stepping down. She sat on the floor of her penthouse one night, barefoot, in silence. Madison's warning echoed in her head. Connor watched her from the kitchen, unsure whether to speak. She finally did. "I don't know if I built this for myself," she said. "Or if I just built it to prove them all wrong." Connor walked over, kneeling beside her. "Does it matter?" She looked at him. "I don't want to be a shadow anymore." He smiled gently. "Then don't be." And just like that, the decision was made. The next morning, Reagan Whitmore held her first press conference in a decade. She stood at the podium, not hidden, not anonymous, not quiet. "I've spent most of my career behind a curtain," she began. "Today, I step forward not because I was forced to, but because I'm ready." She laid it bare. The betrayal, the audit, the structural changes she had made. She announced a new leadership team. She made Madison head of external compliance. She even invited Catherine's replacement from within, a young associate she had once mentored in secret. Then she stepped back, not down, back. She would no longer be the only name behind every move. She had built the empire. Now she would guide it, but not own all of it. Letting go wasn't failure. It was evolution. 10 months later, Madison visited her in the Berkshires, where Reagan had bought a quiet cabin near a lake. The city felt far away. "So you're not coming back?" Madison asked. Reagan shook her head. "I never really left. I'm just not at war with it anymore." Madison smiled. "Funny, you always look so small to me. Now I can't stop seeing how big you really are." Reagan looked out at the water. "Maybe I was never small," she said. "Maybe I was just quiet enough that you had to lean in to hear me." Madison took her hand, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a competition. It felt like peace. And somewhere in Boston, the tower still bore her name. But it was just a name now. The real empire lived in the lives she changed, the silence she broke, and the strength she finally allowed herself to share. What part of Reagan's journey resonated most deeply with you? Comment 100 if you loved this story. And tell us, where are you watching from today? Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that quiet strength is still strength. Thank you for watching Life Stories.